Human found an alien girl resting beside his faded flag. Her quiet reason for choosing it moved him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main character. Ethan Mitchell wasn't looking for anything special that day. He was simply walking through the quiet woods outside his cabin, the damp leaves beneath his boots crunching softly with each step. The chilly air bit at his skin, reminding him that winter was approaching fast. His mind was preoccupied with thoughts of the days ahead, but then, as he rounded a bend in the trail, something caught his eye. There, beside a faded flag that had clearly seen better days, was a figure, motionless. At first, he thought it might be an illusion, the tired eyes playing tricks on him. But no, it was a girl, an alien girl. She was lying there, her delicate form sprawled out beside the worn flag as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Her skin was a soft shade of green, a hue that seemed almost ethereal against the earth tones of the surrounding forest. Her long, silver hair fell around her like a shimmering veil, and her eyes, when they finally opened, were the color of a stormy sea, deep and full of emotion. Ethan stood frozen for a moment, his instincts telling him to be cautious, but something inside him urged him forward. He hadn't been expecting to find anyone, let alone an alien, so far out in these woods. She wasn't moving, her body tense as if caught between sleep and wakefulness. Her gaze slowly shifted to meet his, and Ethan felt a strange pull, a connection that he couldn't quite explain. He cleared his throat. "Hey," he said softly, trying to sound as unthreatening as possible. "Are you okay?" The alien girl didn't respond at first. Instead, she looked at the flag beside her, her gaze lingering on the faded stripes. The flag, once vibrant and full of life, was now worn, tattered by the years of weathering. It seemed out of place in the wilderness, a symbol of something far beyond this remote stretch of forest. Ethan followed her gaze, puzzled. "What's this about?" he asked. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft, almost a whisper. "It reminds me of home," she said, her tone carrying an unmistakable weight. "The flag, it's a symbol of peace and hope, but it's also a reminder of everything we've lost." Ethan felt a pang of empathy for the girl, though he couldn't fully understand the depth of what she was saying. The alien girl continued, her eyes not leaving the flag. "We had a home once, a place where we were safe, but that was before the war, before we lost everything." Her words hung in the air, heavy with grief. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. This wasn't just any alien girl. It was someone who had known loss, who had experienced the kind of pain he could only imagine. It made his heart ache for her. He didn't know why she had chosen to rest beside his flag, why it had drawn her to this place, but there was something undeniably poignant about the scene. She had chosen this faded symbol of humanity's past to be her anchor in a world that was no longer hers. The quiet sadness in her voice stirred something in Ethan. He didn't know what to say, didn't know what was appropriate in a moment like this, but he knew one thing. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. He took a step closer, offering his hand. "You're not alone," he said quietly. "If you need a place to stay, if you need help, I'm here." For the first time since he'd found her, the alien girl's expression softened. She looked at him, her stormy eyes flickering with something that resembled gratitude, before she slowly reached out and took his hand. And just like that, in the middle of the wild, beside a faded flag, two worlds collided. And one person found that sometimes, all it takes is a small act of kindness to change the course of fate. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Ethan and Liara stood in the clearing, the faint light of day casting long shadows over the forest floor. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves and carrying with it the scent of pine and earth. Ethan glanced over at the alien girl, who had been unusually quiet since he'd offered her his hand. Her eyes were still focused on the faded flag, her expression distant, as if lost in thought. "I'm sorry," Liara finally said, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, almost fragile. "I didn't mean to burden you with my pain. I needed to rest somewhere familiar, even if it wasn't my own place." Ethan looked at her, unsure of what to say. He had never been in a situation like this, dealing with someone who wasn't just from another planet, but who had also experienced a kind of loss he could barely understand. "It's okay," he said, his voice steady. "You don't have to explain. I'm just glad you're not alone." Liara turned her head to meet his gaze, her silver eyes reflecting the last light of the day. For a moment, Ethan thought he saw a flicker of something in her. Hope, perhaps, or maybe something even deeper. "You don't know what it means to me," she whispered. "To find someone who sees me, not just as an alien, but as someone worth helping." Ethan's heart tightened at the sincerity in her voice. He wasn't used to being called a hero. In fact, he had never thought of himself as one. But here, in this moment, with Liara standing beside him, he realized that sometimes it wasn't about grand gestures or epic battles. Sometimes, it was just about being there for someone who needed it. They walked together back to the cabin, the last traces of daylight fading behind them. The quiet between them wasn't awkward, but comfortable. As they reached the door, Ethan stopped and turned to Liara. "You can stay as long as you need," he said, his voice firm, offering her the kind of security she seemed to need. "I have plenty of room. And if you want to talk, or even just sit in silence, I'm here." Liara's eyes softened as she nodded. "Thank you, Ethan," she said quietly. The warmth in her voice was enough to make Ethan smile. Inside, the cabin was warm and inviting, the soft glow of the fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. He gestured for her to sit by the hearth. As she settled down, Ethan moved to the kitchen, grabbing 2 mugs and filling them with hot cocoa. He wasn't sure why he had made the gesture. Maybe it was just something to do, something to break the silence, but it felt right. He handed one of the mugs to Liara, who took it gratefully. "I haven't had hot cocoa in years," she said with a smile, the first real smile Ethan had seen from her since they met. The sight of it warmed his heart. "I've never met anyone like you," she said after a long pause. "You've shown me kindness when I thought I was beyond help. I didn't expect to find this peace." Ethan sat down across from her, his own mug in hand. He looked into the fire, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Sympathy, yes, but also something deeper, something that made him feel more connected to Liara than he had expected. "You're not beyond help," he said softly, his voice steady but full of conviction. "No one is." They sat in silence for a while, sipping their cocoa, the crackling of the fire the only sound in the room. It wasn't much, but in that quiet moment, Ethan felt like they had reached an understanding, a mutual respect that had transcended their differences. They weren't just a human and an alien anymore. They were 2 people, sharing a moment of connection in a world that sometimes felt too big to understand. The night passed slowly, and by the time Ethan stood to stoke the fire, Liara had fallen asleep on the couch, her head resting against the armrest. He smiled, a soft, contented smile. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like he had done something meaningful. And as the firelight danced across the room, he knew that, whatever the future held, he had made the right choice in helping her. Liara wasn't just a stranger from another world. She was someone worth fighting for, someone worth saving. And for Ethan, that was enough. The morning sun streamed through the cabin's small window, casting soft light across the room. Ethan had been awake for a while, sitting by the fire and reflecting on the strange turn his life had taken. It had only been a few days since he found Liara, the alien girl, resting beside his flag, but already he felt an attachment to her that he couldn't quite explain. As he gazed out at the peaceful forest, the weight of the situation settled on him. Liara was not just a stranger from another world. She was someone who had experienced loss, someone who had been left behind in a way he couldn't imagine. She had trusted him, and for some reason, that trust meant everything. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted when he heard a soft rustling from the couch. Liara stirred, her silver eyes fluttering open as she sat up, slowly stretching. The warmth of the fire seemed to comfort her, but her expression was still a bit distant. "Good morning," Ethan said, offering a smile as he stood to make more coffee. Liara nodded but didn't respond right away. She seemed to be gathering her thoughts, looking out the window at the woods beyond. "I've never seen a place like this before," she said quietly. "It's so peaceful here. It feels safe." Ethan placed a cup of coffee on the table in front of her, his eyes studying her face. He could see that she was still struggling with something deep inside, something that had been buried for a long time. "You're safe here," he said softly, sitting across from her. You don't have to worry about anything. You can take all the time you need. Liara's eyes flickered to the window again, her gaze distant. I didn't expect this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't expect to find kindness. Not like this. Not after everything. Ethan felt a pang of sadness in his chest. He could hear the quiet desperation in her words, the weight of her past pressing down on her. He reached out, placing a hand on the table between them. You've been through a lot, haven't you? He asked gently. Liara looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. I've seen things, she said. I've lost everything. My people, my home. I thought I would never find anything again. But here you are, and everything is different. I don't know what to do with that. Ethan didn't have the answers. He didn't know how to fix what had happened to her, but he knew one thing. He couldn't turn his back on her now. You don't have to do anything, he said quietly. Just take it one step at a time. You're not alone anymore. Liara finally looked up at him, her eyes shining with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but the words caught in her throat. Ethan gave her a small smile. You don't have to explain. Not yet. Just know that you're safe here, with me. For the first time since they'd met, Liara's expression softened. She took a deep breath and nodded. Thank you, she whispered. I'm not sure what I did to deserve your kindness, but I'm grateful. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. You didn't do anything to deserve it, he said softly. It's just who I am. And right now, it's all I can offer. The room was quiet again, the only sound being the crackling of the fire. Outside, the world was still, peaceful. Inside, Ethan and Liara were slowly beginning to build something new. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. And as the day stretched out before them, Ethan knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The next few days passed slowly, but in a way that felt strangely comforting. Ethan continued his daily routine, tending to the cabin and preparing meals, while Liara seemed to settle in, her quiet presence no longer an oddity, but a part of the natural rhythm of life. She spent her mornings exploring the forest, her eyes always searching, as if she were still trying to understand this new world she had found herself in. Ethan noticed that she would often return to the clearing where they had met, the faded flag still there, as if it held some unspoken meaning for her. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Liara returned with a look of quiet determination in her eyes. I've been thinking, she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. About what you said. About not being alone. Ethan paused, putting down the firewood he had been chopping. What do you mean? I've spent so long believing that I was alone, she continued, her gaze drifting towards the trees. That my people were lost to me forever, that my home was a distant memory. But now, I don't know. I feel like maybe I don't have to carry it all by myself anymore. Ethan didn't know how to respond, but something inside him shifted. He could hear the rawness in her words, the pain that she was trying to hide beneath a calm exterior. He walked over to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to carry it alone, Liara, he said softly. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. You're not alone, not anymore. She met his gaze then, her eyes filled with a vulnerability that she had never shown before. Thank you, she whispered, the words barely audible. But they were enough. In that moment, Ethan realized that their bond had grown into something deeper than either of them could have expected. They were not just two strangers from different worlds. They were two souls, connected by shared understanding and mutual respect. That evening, after dinner, they sat outside together, the fire crackling softly beside them. Liara had begun to share more of her past, the fragments of her life before the war had torn everything apart. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She spoke of her family, of the days before the conflict, when her people had lived in peace. We used to have a home, she said quietly, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. A place where we could be together, safe. But that's all gone now. Ethan listened carefully, offering what comfort he could. He didn't know what to say to take away the pain she carried, but he could be there, listening, offering a quiet presence. Do you ever wish you could go back? He asked after a long silence. Liara's eyes flickered to the sky, where the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening expanse above. Sometimes, she admitted, her voice tinged with sorrow. But I know I can't. I have to keep moving forward, even if I don't know where that will lead me. Ethan nodded, understanding more than he could put into words. I think that's all any of us can do, he said softly. Move forward, one step at a time. The night passed quietly, the two of them sitting together, not needing words to fill the silence. It was a comfortable peace, one that neither of them had known in a long time. As the fire flickered out, and the cabin grew still, Ethan felt a sense of contentment settle over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And in that moment, that was enough. The days continued to flow by within easy rhythm, one that Ethan had never truly known before. Life had become simpler since Liara arrived. Though he had not expected it, he found himself enjoying the quiet companionship. She had become an essential part of his daily routine, not as a stranger, but as someone who had rooted herself into his life in a way he hadn't anticipated. Each morning, after their usual breakfast of warm bread and coffee, they would go on short walks through the woods. Liara was still exploring the world around her, her curiosity about Earth seeming endless, her eyes always filled with wonder as she touched the trees, the leaves, and the flowers as if trying to memorize every detail. Ethan watched her, marveling at how someone who had lost so much could still find beauty in the smallest things. They had their share of quiet conversations, talking about everything and nothing at all. Liara spoke of her life before the war, the people she had known, the planet she had called home, but always in a way that didn't dwell on the sadness of it all. She had a way of looking forward, of seeing the good, despite everything she had experienced. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch, Liara asked Ethan about his past. "Tell me about Earth," she said, her voice soft. "What was it like before everything changed for you?" Ethan shifted slightly in his chair, thinking. Before everything changed, it was ordinary. Quiet. People lived their lives, working, raising families. Things didn't feel so heavy. I guess I took it all for granted back then. Liara nodded, her silver eyes thoughtful. I can understand that. We often take what we have for granted until it's taken from us. Ethan looked at her, a faint smile on his lips. It's funny. I used to think my life was hard before I met you. But now, looking at you, I don't know how you've managed to keep going. Liara tilted her head slightly, a small smile appearing on her face. Because I have to. I don't have a choice. I keep moving, one step at a time, even when it's hard. Ethan felt a deep respect for her in that moment. Her strength, her resilience, it was something he could never fully comprehend, but he admired it all the same. I guess we all keep moving forward, don't we? He said, his voice quiet. No matter what life throws at us. Yes, Liara agreed, her smile growing warmer. One step at a time. The conversation lingered in the air between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if they had both found a common understanding, a connection that didn't need to be explained. As the evening grew closer, they moved inside, the last light of day casting long shadows across the room. Ethan made dinner, something simple but filling, stew and cornbread, and they ate together, quietly. There was no need for words. The peace in the room spoke for itself. After dinner, they sat in front of the fire, its warm glow dancing on the walls. Liara rested her head on the armrest, her eyes half closed as she stared into the flames. Ethan, too, felt the weight of the day settling over him, a peaceful kind of exhaustion. For the first time in a long while, he felt content. Thank you, Liara said softly, breaking the silence. For everything. For making me feel safe. Ethan glanced over at her, his heart swelling with emotion. You don't have to thank me, he said, his voice gentle. You're family now, and no one should be alone, not like that. Liara looked at him then, her expression softening. Maybe that's what makes you different, she said quietly. You don't just offer help. You offer something deeper, something that I didn't think I'd find again. Ethan met her gaze, the connection between them stronger than ever. You're not alone anymore, he said, his voice firm, filled with conviction. And for the first time since she had arrived, Liara truly believed him. Days passed, and with each one, the bond between Ethan and Liara grew stronger. They began to fall into a rhythm, their lives intertwining in ways neither of them could have expected. Ethan's cabin, once a quiet and solitary place, now felt like home to them both. It was strange how quickly they had adapted to this new life, as if their meeting had been inevitable. Liara had stopped wandering the woods alone, now spending more time helping Ethan around the cabin. She was learning about Earth's customs, The small, everyday tasks that had once seemed mundane to her, but were now part of a life she was beginning to embrace. They had their conversations, of course. Sometimes, they talked about the past, about what they had both lost. But more often than not, they spoke about the future, about what could be, about how life could go on, no matter the scars it left behind. It was a chilly morning when Liara came to Ethan with a question that had been on her mind for some time. She found him outside, chopping wood, the cold air making his breath visible as he worked. "Ethan," she called softly, her voice carrying across the yard. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold, and turned to her. "What's on your mind?" Liara stepped closer, her eyes thoughtful, almost hesitant. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began. "About moving forward. But how do you really do that? How do you stop looking back at everything you've lost and just keep going?" Ethan leaned the axe against a tree and walked over to her, considering her words carefully. He could see the uncertainty in her eyes, the way she carried the weight of her past with her, even now. "It's not easy," he said finally, his voice low. "Some days, it feels like the past is all you can see. But you can't stay there. You just have to take each day as it comes. One step, one moment at a time." Liara nodded, though she didn't look entirely convinced. "But what if the future feels so uncertain? What if you don't know where you're going?" Ethan smiled gently. "That's the thing. You don't have to know. You just have to keep moving. Trust that, eventually, you'll find a way." Liara was quiet for a moment, processing his words. Then she looked up at him, a small but genuine smile appearing on her face. "Thank you," she whispered, "for helping me believe that." Ethan's heart warmed at the sincerity in her voice. He had never expected to be the one to offer hope, to be the one to guide someone through their pain. But here he was, and somehow, it felt right. "Anytime," he said, his voice steady. "We're in this together, Liara. You're not alone." They stood there for a moment, the silence between them comfortable, before Ethan broke it. "Why don't you come inside? I've got some fresh bread baking, and I could use a hand with the stew." Liara's smile widened as she nodded. "I'd like that." As they walked back toward the cabin, side by side, Ethan realized that, in helping Liara move forward, he had found something for himself as well, something he hadn't even known he was missing. And maybe, just maybe, they could both heal together. The days went on, and with each one, the weight of the past began to feel a little lighter. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever really was, but for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. And with Liara by his side, he knew that the future, whatever it held, would be something they could face together. The next few weeks settled into a comfortable routine for Ethan and Liara. The forest around them began to shift with the seasons, and soon the once crisp air turned warmer as spring slowly crept in. The days were filled with tasks, chopping wood, fixing up the cabin, tending to the small garden outside. But there was something different now. There was a sense of peace, a quiet companionship between them that neither had expected. One afternoon, as they worked together to clean up the yard, Liara looked up from her task and, for the first time, asked Ethan a question about his past that made him pause. "What happened to your family?" she asked softly, her voice carrying a hint of concern. Ethan stopped mid-action, his hand gripping the rake a little tighter than necessary. He glanced over at her, unsure how to respond. It wasn't that he didn't want to talk about it. It was just that he had never really found the right moment to share his past. "I lost them a long time ago," he said after a long pause, his voice low. "It was a car accident. My parents, my younger sister, they didn't make it." Liara's eyes softened as she listened, and Ethan could see the empathy in her gaze. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her words carrying a weight that only someone who had lost everything could truly understand. Ethan gave a small nod, appreciating her sincerity, but he wasn't sure how to continue. "It was a long time ago," he said finally. "I've learned to move on, just like you." There was a long pause as the two of them stood in silence, the sounds of the forest around them filling the space between words. Ethan didn't expect her to respond, but after a moment, she spoke again. "How did you do it? Move on, I mean." He chuckled softly, the sound more bitter than he intended. "I don't know. I guess, eventually, the pain just becomes something you live with. You don't forget, but you learn to carry it. You have to." Liara nodded, her eyes reflecting the same quiet sadness that had followed her since they first met. "I know what you mean," she said softly. The pain never really goes away, but sometimes you find a way to make it bearable. Ethan glanced at her, surprised by how much he felt he could relate to her words. They had both been through things that left scars, and in some ways, they were both still trying to heal. We're not so different, are we? He said with a small smile. Liara gave a small, wry smile in return. I guess not. As they continued working, there was a quiet understanding between them. They didn't need to speak any further on the subject. Both of them had said enough. Later that evening, after a simple dinner of stew and bread, they sat together by the fire, the warmth of the flames filling the small cabin. Liara was unusually quiet, her gaze distant as she stared into the fire. Ethan watched her, his thoughts on the conversation they had just shared. You know, he said after a while, his voice soft, I'm glad you're here. Liara turned to look at him, her expression softening. I'm glad too, she said, her voice low but sincere. I never thought I'd find a place like this. A place where I don't have to hide who I am. Ethan smiled, feeling a sense of warmth spread through him. You don't have to hide anything here, Liara. You can be yourself. They sat there in comfortable silence for a while longer, the fire crackling softly between them. Outside, the night had settled in, and the world beyond the cabin was quiet, peaceful. Inside, Ethan realized that in the short time since Liara had come into his life, she had brought a sense of purpose he hadn't even known he was missing. Together, they had found something worth holding on to, a reason to keep moving forward, one step at a time. The days turned into weeks, and the world around Ethan and Liara continued to shift as the seasons changed. The once crisp mornings grew warmer, and the days seemed to stretch on, filled with the quiet hum of everyday life. Ethan had never imagined that his days could be this peaceful, this filled with purpose. Liara had become more than just a guest in his home. She had become a part of his life, a presence he could no longer imagine being without. It wasn't just the companionship, though that had been a welcome change. It was the understanding, the connection that had formed between them. One evening, after they had shared another simple but satisfying meal, Ethan found himself sitting on the porch, the cool evening air brushing against his face. Liara joined him, sitting beside him without a word, as they both gazed at the stars. It had become one of their quiet rituals, sitting together in the evening, neither of them speaking much, but simply enjoying the presence of the other. After a long silence, Liara spoke, her voice soft but steady. Ethan, do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had never met? She asked, her gaze still fixed on the sky. Ethan took a moment to consider her question, the weight of it settling over him. He had thought about it before, but now that she had brought it up, the answer seemed clearer than ever. I don't know, he said slowly, his voice thoughtful. But I know that meeting you changed everything. I didn't realize how much I was missing until you were here. Liara turned her head to look at him, her silver eyes reflecting the soft glow of the stars above. You've changed my life, too, she said quietly. I thought I had lost everything. I thought I was beyond saving. But then I found you. And now, I'm starting to believe that maybe I can find a new purpose. Ethan felt a warmth spread through him at her words. He had never thought of himself as someone capable of offering that kind of hope to another person, especially not someone like Liara, who had endured so much. But here they were, together, each of them finding solace in the other's company. You've already found a purpose, Liara, he said, his voice gentle. You've helped me see the world in a way I hadn't before. And you've made this place feel like home. Liara smiled, her eyes softening. Maybe we're both helping each other, then, she said. Maybe that's what we were always meant to do. They sat there for a while longer, the silence between them comfortable, the weight of the world seeming to fade away for just a moment. It wasn't perfect, not by any means. There were still days when the past would come crashing back, when the memories of what they had both lost would threaten to overwhelm them. But those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. As the night deepened, they both stood and walked back inside, the warmth of the cabin a welcome contrast to the chill of the evening. Ethan glanced over at Liara, her figure silhouetted against the dim light of the cabin. Tomorrow, I was thinking we could take a walk down to the river, he said. It's been a while since we've been out there. The water should be clear by now. Liara nodded, her face lighting up with a small but genuine smile. I'd like that. And with that, they settled into their evening, the quiet of the cabin wrapping around them like a comforting blanket. Ethan knew that, no matter what the future held, they would face it together. And that thought was enough to fill him with a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The next morning, the air was cool and crisp as Ethan and Liara made their way down to the river. The path they followed was familiar to Ethan, a route he had walked many times before, but this time, with Liara by his side, it felt different. It felt like the beginning of something new. The sound of the water flowing gently over the rocks was soothing, and for a moment, they walked in silence, simply enjoying each other's presence. Liara seemed more at ease than she had in weeks, her silver eyes reflecting the peace of the natural world around them. The weight of her past, the pain of everything she had lost, seemed to lessen with each step they took. "It's beautiful here," Liara said softly, her voice almost a whisper. Ethan glanced over at her, noticing the way her gaze lingered on the river, as if she were taking in every detail. "It's one of my favorite places," he replied, his voice calm. "There's something about the water that makes everything feel clearer." Liara nodded, her lips curving into a small, thoughtful smile. "I think I understand," she said, her voice barely audible. They reached the river's edge, where the current flowed gently over the rocks, the water clear and inviting. Liara knelt down, dipping her fingers into the cool stream, watching the ripples spread out from her touch. "It's different from the rivers on my planet," she murmured, almost to herself. "But there's something familiar about it. It feels like home." Ethan stood a few steps behind her, taking in the sight of her, the way she seemed to lose herself in the simplicity of the moment. It was a reminder of just how much she had changed since arriving here. The Liara he had first met had been closed off, wary, but now, she seemed to be finding her place, her peace, in this new world. He stepped forward, standing beside her. "It's strange, isn't it?" he said, his voice soft. "How sometimes we find a little piece of home in places we never expected." Liara turned to look at him, her expression gentle. "I think you're right," she said. "I never imagined that I'd find anything like this. A place where I could just be me." Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. "You're not alone, Liara," he said simply. "And you don't have to carry the weight of your past on your own anymore." For a moment, there was only the sound of the river and the rustling of leaves in the trees. It was as if time had slowed, allowing them to simply exist in this shared moment. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting a warm light over the landscape, Liara stood and turned toward Ethan, her expression soft but determined. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Ethan nodded, his smile genuine. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "I'm just glad you're here." The two of them stood together for a while longer, taking in the view, the peace of the river, and the quiet companionship they had found in each other. It wasn't just a peaceful morning by the water. It was a moment that marked the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. And though the future was still uncertain, with each passing day, they were learning to face it together, step by step. As they began to make their way back to the cabin, side by side, Ethan couldn't help but feel that, no matter what came next, they would be ready. They had already found something precious, a new beginning, in each other.